The next day, I wrote about this immediately, and I broadcast that the Democrats will use January 6th the way the Nazis used the Reichstag fire. And that is exactly what has happened. What did the Nazis do? They said, we are going to suppress liberty because of the fire there. And that's what the Democrats have done. They have suppressed liberty because of the so-called insurrection. It was not an insurrection. There's no such thing as an unarmed insurrection. The amount of violence was minuscule compared to most of, or many of, the riots after the George Floyd death.
Dennis Prager returns again as a guest, and I'm delighted to have him. He's one of America's clearest and most critical thinkers and public commentators. He is very well known for the ever-popular PragerU platform on YouTube and for his work with PragerU University. He engages consistently in what seem to be the most important debates of our time. Dennis, it's terrific to have you with us again.
It's an honor to be with you.
Can I kick off by quoting a former Prime Minister of Australia, Bob Hawke? He said that when the bell tolls for Israel, it tolls for us all in the free world. I think he had a point. It always seems to me that this ugly and oldest form of prejudice, when it rears its ugly head, it's a pointer really to deeper, more troubling times ahead.
That's right. I wrote many years ago. I wrote a book on anti-Semitism called "Why the Jews." It's coming out in a third edition, and the subtitle is "The Reason for Anti-Semitism." It's "Why the Jews." The reason for anti-Semitism: the greatest predictor of evil, and that's exactly what it is. The Jews have a very undesirable fate to be the world's miner's canary, and I'm hardly the first to note this. It must be a long time ago because I wrote about it about 40 years ago, and I heard it from someone. So I didn't come up with this, but that is exactly what it is. For those of your viewers, listeners who don't know, the miner's canary is apparently miners would take canaries down to the mines because when there were noxious fumes, they would die, and then the miners would realize, whoa, we better battle those fumes or we'll die. So when there were noxious fumes, the Jews die first, and then the non-Jew can either come to one of two conclusions. That the fumes only kill canaries, or we better battle the fumes or they'll kill us. Most non-Jews think that the fumes only kill the canaries when it comes to the Jews, so that Hitler was dismissed as the Jews' problem until tens upon tens of millions of non-Jews died as a result of Hitler. If people don't understand that Hamas is the closest we have to real Nazis, then it is because they don't want to confront that fact. But your former prime minister was exactly correct, and that is what people should understand. The hatred of the Jew is the hatred of civilization. I'll add one point here. Israel is frequently accused by the Muslim world that hates it. Not all Muslims hate it, but many do. Of being an outpost of Western civilization in the Middle East. And they're right. That's exactly what it is. Unfortunately, Western civilization has no interest in protecting Western civilization anymore, including their own, let alone little Israel. And that's the crisis we find ourselves in.
A friend of mine recently said that if he had his way, every Australian schoolchild should visit a Holocaust museum. I think perhaps he had a point. I wonder whether any of this victim oppressor language, colonizer language, the Jewish people as oppressors and colonizers, whether you could ever let those thoughts escape your lips if you'd actually understood what was done to the Jewish people in the 1930s, and if you kept in mind that there were many people for whom the charge might be made, they didn't commit the crimes, but they turned a blind eye and thus are culpable themselves. Do you think this is, I guess the question is, our unbelievable ignorance of history or distortionist, revisionist history, when we do teach it, has allowed a vacuum to be created in the West today in understanding the issues and the need for a homeland for the Jewish people?
So I have a number of comments. First, I wrote a column. I've been writing a weekly column. They're all on the internet for 20 years. So there are 1,000 of my columns up there. And a few months ago, I wrote a column about the ignorance of evil among young Americans. And I suspect it's just as true in almost any Western society. They don't know what Auschwitz is. They don't know what Gulag is. They don't know who Pol Pot was. They don't know what Mao did. They don't know evil. So they're spectacularly naive. And naive is worse than ignorant, because naive means you're incapable, at least during your period of naivete, of grasping evil. They just don't know. So evil in America today, it's evil if you engage in a microaggression. It's evil if you think that men who say their women should not compete in women's sports, then you are transphobic, and that's evil. But Auschwitz and Gulag and Mao and Pol Pot, they're who are they? What are they? They wouldn't know. I do suspect that if I went to any prestigious university in the United States and just asked 100 students, what is the Gulag Archipelago? I don't believe more than 10%. And I may be wrong that it's even 10% would know what that is. Who was Stalin? I don't even know how many would have an answer. So that's answer number one to your point about the ignorance of real evil. As regards having all young people study or at least visit a museum of the Holocaust, I think it would be very valuable, but I'm not sure it would have much of an impact with regard to what is happening now, because what they would say is, well, that was a terrible thing, of course, but why should the Arabs have paid the price of European anti-Semitism and have Israel established in their land, or what they would call their land? Of course, it wasn't anybody's land. The only independent states to ever exist on those in the area called geographically by the name Palestine have been Jewish countries. The first Jewish republic, the second, which was destroyed in, 79 AD or 73 AD? In any event, this is the third independent state to ever exist in that area, and all three have been Jewish states. But nobody knows that either. So, as important as what your friend recommended, I think you said it was a friend, as important as that recommendation is, I don't think it would have a big impact upon the leftist narrative that you don't divide the world between good and evil, but between rich and poor, white and non-white, colonizer and colonized. And by the way, on the white, non-white, the joke is that most Israelis are not white. But, who wants to bother?
Yeah.
Who wants to bother with facts?
Well, I take the point. It strikes me as part of this unbelievable naivety that the word genocide is bandied around without any understanding of its genesis. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the word has its origins in an attempt to describe that deliberate intent of the Nazis to obliterate a race. And let's not forget there were Arab leaders wanting to participate in exporting Jews from the Middle East to the gas chambers. They were in collaboration with the Nazis. I don't think they got many out, but they were looking to participate in that great evil. So the word's invented for that horrific event, as I understand it. I'd be interested in your knowledge on this. But now, apparently, the Israelis are intent upon genocide, and no one points to the fact that it's actually stated in the Articles of Association, if you like, in the Charter of Hamas. They are actually open about their intention to deliver genocide, the genocide of the Jewish people, or at least the obliteration of the Jewish state. And it just raises for me again the other issue that at least the Nazis tried to hide from themselves even and the world what they were doing. These people openly brag about it, and we don't think it matters. We have young people in Australia who are celebrating Hamas. They're enjoying the freedoms in Australia under, as you know, if you like, the Australian government, which recognises Hamas as a terrorist organisation. And how warped is all that?
I don't know what the scale of warpedness would be, but it would be very high on the scale. Everything you said is accurate. Genocide, the very term, was developed as a result of one of the only true genocides in history, that which was perpetrated against the Jews. The attack on Israel for being genocidal, first, it is worth noting there are, I think, at least 5 times as many Palestinians today as there were when Israel was established. So if Israel wanted to commit genocide against Palestinians, it is the greatest failure in the history of attempted genocides. But it doesn't matter. Facts don't matter. And there's a reason for that. This is something I say on my American radio show almost every day and have for decades. Truth is a liberal value and truth is a conservative value, but truth has never been a left-wing value. Truth is irrelevant to leftism, literally irrelevant. They don't ask, is it true? They ask, is it racist? Is it homophobic? Is it transphobic? Is it xenophobic? That's what they don't ask, is it true? So they are free to engage in 2 enormous lies that Israel's an apartheid state. It has 2 million, 20% of its citizens are not Jewish, but overwhelmingly Muslim Arabs. They're Palestinians. They are the freest Arabs in the Arab world. The freest Arabs in the Arab world are the Arabs living in the Jewish state. I don't think, 2% of the university students in Australia know this, or in the United States for that matter. So we live in a sea of lies, and the apartheid and the genocide lies are vindication of the famous Goebbels quote that if you repeat anything enough, people will believe it. So it's a disgrace. The head of the British Army in Afghanistan and an American Army officer who teaches at West Point, the U.S. military academy, both have spoken about Israel as the most moral army in the world. Literally, that's their words. At PragerU.com or PragerUniversity.com, there is this 5-minute video. We have 700 5-minute videos, among other things, up, and we have this British general giving a talk about the unique moral behavior of the Israeli army, and they're the ones accused of atrocities and genocide. You
It is
you
extraordinary.
can't,
Um,
forgive me, I just want to say, you can't have a good world if lies are allowed. Lies are the root of evil. With all respect to uh, the famous and excellent phrase, "The love of money is the root of evil," uh, or I would say it's a root, but I would say lies are the root.
well, I take the point. I suppose really the love of money is a great evil because it leads you to be so very untrustworthy. But in relation to what is now happening, our foreign minister here in Australia was one of the first out of the blocks when it became obvious that Israel would respond, had to respond after the atrocities of October the 7th, to call for a proportionate response. What on earth can that mean? Are we to say that no German civilians should have died as the Allies sought to remove the Nazis? Not even the German civilians believed that at the end of the war. They understood who was responsible for them dying as Germany was bombed. I understand that many Germans understood that it was in fact the Nazis who began the violence and could stop it, were in the best position to stop it. But no, proportionality. What on
Right.
earth do you
What?
think
Right.
drives that idea?
Well, so I've asked this question. So if the Israelis had raped as many women as Hamas did, but the exact same number, would they say, "Oh, that was proportional"? Just just what is it? What does it mean exactly? And did anybody say this during World War II? Oh, the British and American bombing of Germany, it's not proportional. And that's true. Far more German civilians were killed by the Allies than American or Brit civilians by the Germans or the Japanese. Uh, but people didn't think that way. The day Hitler and the Nazis would surrender, it ended the war. If Hamas surrendered, it would end the war. But you never hear that. There's no call for Hamas to surrender. We are way, way morally inferior to what the West was in World War II. There's no comparison. It's particularly sad because when you think of the many Aussies who died in World War II fighting for freedom and for the West, and Americans, of course, and others, I never thought I would ever say this. Maybe they died in vain, because whatever they died for is no longer revered by the elites of the countries they fought for.
We recently had our annual Anzac Day when we celebrate Australia's coming of age in a World War I battle. And I asked the question, are we worthy successors as we celebrate what they did? Do we really stand on their shoulders? Do we deserve to? And I think I have to say to you, sadly, I think the question is a real one. Although, as I understand it, a majority of the American people still support Israel. They see through the dishonesty. They see through the hypocrisy and the immorality of the new morality that somehow or other says that a force intent on genocide can then be described as a victim.
I'm just curious. I don't know the answer. And I don't know if a poll has been taken. What is the Australian public's view?
I'm just referring, I gather from Victor Davis Hanson, that recent polling in America shows that overwhelmingly Republican voters still support Israel. It's 50% or below now amongst Democrat supporters, but a clear majority.
Yeah, no, that's in America. I'm asking you if there is such a poll of Australians.
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen it. It may very well be that I've simply missed it. I sometimes do.
Well, what's your sense?
But we are having all the same. One of the ironies is that the left in this country has spent decades demonizing the Americans, but now our campuses are loaded up with young activist students, mostly from very comfortable welfare, middle-class families, or, dare I say it, students from abroad bringing ancient hatred to our shores, far too many of them anyway, but they're now praising the actions on American universities and emulating what's happening in America and saying this is a good thing. So it's the opportunism of the West again, isn't it? One moment, America is the great Satan, the next we must do as they're doing because they're after the little Satan.
So I say as an American with great sadness that the greatest exporter of toxic ideas today, except for perhaps the Chinese Communist Party, which does it far more subtly through TikTok and other ways, is the United States. It's incredibly sad for me to say because I've really had a lifelong love affair with my country. But I don't live in a make-believe world. My country, thanks to the left, 100% thanks to the left. Again, something I say virtually every day, the left destroys everything it touches. That has been true since the French Revolution and especially since the Russian Revolution. Whatever it touches, race relations, we have the most depressed, according to, even the left acknowledges this. It's the most depressed generation of young American women since we had begun measuring depression or mental health among young people in the United States. That's a direct result of what the left has done with ludicrous and destructive feminist ideas like you don't need a man to be happy, you don't need to marry, you don't need to have children, you need to have a career. As if 2% of humanity is happy solely thanks to a career without marriage and family. Another study just came out that the happiest women are those who have a husband and family. Now, that doesn't mean every woman who has one is happy or that every single woman is unhappy, but we're talking about the trends. This is all part of everything the left touches. By the way, it's true in every arena. Look at what the left has done to architecture and to art and to music. I know music very well. I conduct orchestras as an avocation, so I've studied music much of my life. And beginning in the 20th century in Europe, what the left did to music with the inanity of atonal music, where it shattered tonality, harmony, and melody. But when you get rid of tonality, harmony, and melody, you don't have music. You have sounds, but not music. Everything the left touches, it destroys.
Just back for a moment, is it possible that, horrifyingly, it may be possible for the Israeli Defense Force to crush Hamas so that it is removed as a military threat, but for us to witness a situation where they win the global propaganda war and thus leave Israel still terribly isolated?
You mean lose the global war?
Well, in other words, the evaporation of support that we're now seeing, particularly, say, amongst Democrat Americans. And one observer said to me recently that Biden may be the last Democrat president who supports Israel. Is it possible that Hamas could be disposed, but they've so damaged Israel's standing, it's left so isolated that they have effectively won the propaganda war and left Israel, dare I say,
yes,
actually exposed to losing its statehood eventually, because nobody will stand with it. No one will stand with the only democracy left standing in the Middle East.
Well, the one of the highest ranking Americans, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, senator from New York State, who was a Jew and who made a big deal in his speech that he is a Jew and he cares about Israel. And his name, Schumer, in Hebrew, it comes from shomer, which means guardian, and he's a guardian of Israel. And he gave this awful speech in which he said to the Israelis that they should elect another leader. I don't know if in American history, as high-ranking an American has ever given a speech telling another democracy what leaders they should have. It may have happened, but I'm a keen observer of American political life. I don't recall it ever happening. And he spoke twice. I read every word of the speech, and twice he described Israel as the pariah of nations. Not communist China, not North Korea, not Iran, not Russia. Israel, the pariah of nations. I can only say that the biblical statement in the book of Numbers, where the pagan prophet Balaam describes the Israel as a nation that shall dwell alone and not be reckoned among the nations. So that was almost 3,000 years ago. So it appears, doesn't it?
Donald Trump, when president, as I understand, was a great advocate for Israel. He was on side. If he wins later this year, what sort of impact do you think that might have on America's foreign policy in relation to the Middle East generally and Israel in particular? Do you see hope there in some way?
So if Donald Trump is essentially the same man as who governed as president 4 years ago for 4 years, so between 4 and 8 years ago, then it would have a very salutary effect on American foreign policy. I asked one of the leading historians in the United States, Neil Ferguson, who is, I believe, a Brit. He taught at Harvard for a number of years, and now he's at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. So I had him on my radio show, and I usually know what people I interview will answer. I usually know where they're coming from, but I want to hear their explanation. So I asked them a question. But I honestly had no idea what he would answer when I asked him, and this was a few months after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, do you think that if Donald Trump were president, Putin would have invaded Ukraine? And I'm not sure he had time to inhale. He just said no. And I agree with him. If the bad guys are not afraid of the American president, then the bad guys will do what they want. A healthy fear of an American president on the part of bad actors is a very good thing. The left wants the American president to be loved, but that's not a good idea. I have no interest in the American president being loved, especially not by the bad actors in the world. I don't think that Hamas would have done what it did if Donald Trump were president of the United States. They would have worried about what he would have enabled Israel to do, and that is obviously not the case with Joe Biden.
Presumably, then Iran would not like to see a return of a Trump presidency either.
They want Barack Obama for a fourth term. He's having his third term with Joe Biden, and they want a fourth term.
Wow. What do you think will happen later this year? Do you have any thoughts on how it might unfold?
Well, I'll just tell you, I don't know if I have ever answered a prediction question. And I'm not hesitant about answering anything, but I'm not good at predictions. There are too many variables. What I am 100% interested in is not what will happen. I'm interested in it, but I don't have any knowledge or even sense. What I am preoccupied with is what should we do, not what will happen. I can tell you what will happen if we do X or if we do Y but I can't tell you what will happen. There are so many variables. I believe that the Democratic Party will do whatever it can to ensure that no Republican, and especially Donald Trump, would win. And that may or may not entail cheating in some ways in balloting or in counting. But there are many other ways. For example, there can be a last minute terrible development. Look, Donald Trump would have won even with cheating if it weren't for COVID. Now, I don't believe that the Democrats created COVID. That's not my point. I'm just saying that that's what defeated. Joe Biden did not defeat, even if the election were relatively honestly counted. Joe Biden is not the one who defeated Donald Trump. COVID did. And so it was I don't know. Was it horrible luck? Was it Chinese government design? I don't know. And it's an interesting question, not one that I spend much time on. I spend time on only what I can know to be true. I know that COVID defeated Donald Trump more than any other single factor. Will something happen between now and November if the Democrats think that they might lose? That's, if I were a betting man, and I'm not, but if I had to bet, I would bet that something unforeseeable now might happen to shake up the country in such a way, I don't know what it could be. I only know that, as I have posed the question to listeners who have called my radio show and challenged me, because I've said from the beginning, I am agnostic on whether the last election was won honestly. I don't know in either direction for sure. So they would challenge me. And then I would say, let me ask you a question. Isn't it moral to cheat in an election if you believe that you are ensuring that a neo-Nazi, fascist, racist is defeated? And I say, I admit, if I were in Germany in 1932 and I could have cheated and made sure that fewer Nazis were elected in the last free election in Germany till 1945, I would have cheated. I mean, to keep Hitler out of office seems to me that cheating in an election is the lesser of evils. And so you can't say he's a Nazi, he's a racist, he's an anti-Semite, he's a fascist, he will crush democracy in America, and then tell me, but you would never cheat to make sure that he didn't come into the presidency. You can't have it both ways.
Just picking up your point there, if COVID defeated President Trump, might it be also the case that if January the 6th and the impression that he was rejecting the umpire's decision, whether rightly or wrongly, and was encouraging resurrection, if that had not happened, he would probably, there'd be a lot more Americans who didn't have a hesitation about voting for him again?
I condemn.
In other words, he might have
I hear you clearly. I would, first of all, I was broadcasting at the moment the news came in from Washington. I'm on Pacific time, which is 3 hours behind Washington time. So when it was happening in Washington, just as my show was ending, and I condemned it immediately. I didn't even know exactly what happened, but just all these people entering the Capitol struck me as wrong. The next day, I wrote about this immediately, and I broadcast that the Democrats will use January 6th the way the Nazis used the Reichstag fire. And that is exactly what has happened. What did the Nazis do? They said, we are going to suppress liberty because of the parliament, the Reichstag, as it was called, in Germany because of the fire there. And that's what the Democrats have done. They have suppressed liberty because of the so-called insurrection. It was not an insurrection. There's no such thing as an unarmed insurrection. The amount of violence was minuscule compared to a full-fledged resurrection, compared to most of or many of the riots after the George Floyd death in America. But they have built this into a Donald Trump violently trying to overturn an election. Donald Trump is recorded as having said that day, "Go to the Capitol peacefully." There isn't a shred of evidence that he was calling for a violent act against the United States Capitol. And there are so many other issues. Why weren't there more police? Police were asked to have attended. Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat, did not agree to that. There's just too much that happened that day that is worthy of looking into. But whatever one thinks of it, it wasn't an insurrection, and Donald Trump did not call for an insurrection. But that's what they've done. That is the Democrats. They have used it exactly as I predicted the week it happened, that they would use it to suppress liberty. There is less liberty in the United States today than at any time in American history. Obviously, I'm not talking about enslaved blacks who had no liberty, but for the general population, this is unprecedented.
One of the interesting divides that we now see, or I see, correct me if I'm wrong, you're a federal system, so is Australia, and your various states have always prided themselves on having their own history, their own culture, their own, business environment and what have you. And it now seems that the divide between red and blue states is deeper than ever, the reds being Republican or conservative, the blues being liberal or left-wing. You, of course, are probably inclined towards, if I may say so, the red side of thinking in a state that's incredibly blue. That must be interesting for you personally at times, where in California you really have seen wokeism wrecking its way through things. The wages of wokeism appear to be very high indeed. But the question goes to, isn't it yet another fragmentation in America that a lot of Americans must be tempted now to think, well, I live in almost the nation that Ron DeSantis has created in Miami, where in Florida, where it's very different, to California, rather than thinking of themselves primarily as Americans have for so long as Americans first. Any perspectives there that would help a non-American understand the red and blue states and how they're almost becoming principalities in some ways, it seems?
I wrote a column recently that the left-right divide is unbridgeable, and it is. If you believe that it is fair for a man who says he's a woman to compete in women's sports, there's no possible dialogue I can have with you. If you said the earth is flat, it's fair to say that we would have an unbridgeable divide. You reject reality. It is a rejection of reality to believe that men menstruate, or that men who say they're women can compete in women's sports, and that's fair to the women. That is true. The earth is flat metaphor is applicable to the left on. That's not the only issue. It is a doctrine of the left that if you say that you aim to be colorblind, that's racist. That is as absurd as men can compete with women if they say they're women. So, where is the bridge? If you think Israel is the villain in the Middle East, then the odds are you think that men menstruate. I mean, it's all part. Even the New York Times just had a piece last week about all the other ideas, all the left-wing ideas. They didn't use the word left-wing, but all the other ideas that the students taking over universities, ostensibly in just being haters of Israel, but they have all these other ideas as well. Every one of all of the what is called woke or radical or left-wing, and it's an unbridgeable gulf. If you believe in free speech, 45% of young Americans, that is Americans under 25, say that they believe in free speech, but not for hate speech. So they don't believe in free speech. It's obvious. So yes, what you asked is correct. I have said the gulf between the North and South in a civil war that took hundreds of thousands of Americans' lives. It was about one item, a big item, slavery and the humanity of a black human being. So that was an important divide. But basically, that was it. I would say that the average Northerner and the average Southerner had more in common in the 1860s, or at least right after the Civil War, than the average left-wing and right-wing American does today. That's really it's almost unbelievable. But when I went to Florida during the lockdowns in California, I felt that my field of study was communist affairs, and in my 20s I visited communist countries regularly. So I would go all through Eastern Europe, which was communist, and then I'd go into Vienna, which was not communist, Austria. It was neutral, and it was free. And then I'd go back into Eastern Europe, and I felt that when I went from California to Florida, it was like going from, let's say, East Germany to Austria, or West Germany, for that matter. In my life, I never could have predicted that I would think of my country as moving towards a Soviet-like state, but I do.
I hope you won't think this is rude, but when I visited you in Los Angeles, one of the things that absolutely amazed me as we drove around the city and along the motorways. Do you call them motorways, freeways, whatever?
It's fine.
The litter, the rubbish. It spoke of a city that has lost pride in itself, lost direction, that is prepared to litter its own landscape. I couldn't believe how bad it was.
Somehow you're right. Oh, I don't take offense. I take offense at the reality, not at your noting it. And it's worse in San Francisco, if that means anything, where you literally have to look at the ground where you walk, lest you step into human fecal matter, human poop. That is how bad it is in San Francisco. And so the downtown area in San Francisco, which was a glory until a few years ago. And again, remember, everything the left touches, it ruins. That includes states, that includes cities, that includes religions, that includes art, music, everything. It is a purely destructive force, leftism. It only destroys. And so what you saw, there was a theory in the 80s developed by two, at the time, Harvard professors, the broken windows theory. And that was if a city allows broken windows that are broken by villainy to go unrepaired and no one to prosecute the people who did it, that will lead eventually to rape and murder and armed robbery. You have to stop it at the beginning. I marvel at the amount of graffiti. There is almost no bare wall in almost any American city. It is just covered with graffiti. And that that doesn't offend, apparently, at least any Democrat, because they vote for the people who don't care, or worse, call it urban art. I am curious in light of that. I've been to Australia a number of times, but I don't recall. So does Melbourne or Sydney, for example, is there a lot of graffiti?
In my view, no, not by international standards.
That's remarkable,
that is
because all over Europe is graffiti.
Yeah. I'm not saying they're graffiti free. They're not.
No. But obviously, graffiti free is not the same as all over the place. So there are so many symbols of the decline of civilization. The way people dress is another example, and the post-COVID, it's particularly depressing to me. So in the building that you visited me in, where I do my radio show outside of Los Angeles, I take the lift every day to the fifth floor, and young men and women, and especially young men, but both, are often in the lift with me and going to their work offices. They are dressed as they would dress to a barbecue. There is no sense of I should wear anything formal looking to go to work. That to me is a very good example as well, like graffiti and what you raised earlier of the litter. It's all part of a decline, and the decline, by the way, is so in the dress field is so widespread. To my amazement, I have a large audience, as any national show in America would on radio, and most of my listeners are Christian, and it is amazing whenever I have raised the issue how many people who really like me and respect me differ with me when I say that people should dress up to go to church. They say God doesn't care what you wear. I mean, the decline is ubiquitous.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Tell me, let's go back to this issue of red versus blue states and their attitude, or the attitudes of different groupings of people to migration. I suppose you could say that people who were inclined towards the free markets and free enterprise and capitalism were keen for globalization so that you'd get economic advantages playing out properly, and trade would lift people out of poverty everywhere. It didn't work out as well as many of us had hoped. I'll be frank about that. For people like middle Americans in manufacturing, as their jobs disappeared offshore, they understandably became disillusioned. But there was one area where I don't think conservatives ever got it wrong. They didn't try and say that should be the end of the idea of coherent nations with secure borders. Australia's put a lot of effort into securing its borders. It seems to me that the progressive elite's view of borders is that they are an evil thing. You shouldn't try and protect them in any way, like a misguided nationalism or a shucks, isn't that corny patriotism. It should be done away with. Boundaries should be done away with. And so now I understand the issue of your southern borders being, as far as I can tell, unbelievably porous, has become a huge political issue and divide in itself in America. And I can't help wondering, does anyone in America actually know now who is in your country and what they might be?
Well, they don't know who. What we have some sense of the number, and 10 million have come in illegally, minimally. Everyone acknowledges that in the last, I think, 3 years, since Joe Biden has become president. The left does not believe in the nation state. It's as simple as that. And that's why Brexit was extremely important, in my opinion. And the elites were livid that there were people who actually believed in Britain that Brussels should not dominate London's policies. What the chutzpah, the audacity of Brits to think that way. The American Revolution, which I think the American founders were as close to prophets as we've had since Isaiah and Jeremiah. They were giants, and they understood that you can't have liberty and big government. They're mutually exclusive. The bigger the government, the less the liberty. That's my phrase, but that's their idea. And that's exactly right. So, but they not only want big national governments, they want ultimately a big international government. They would like the United Nations essentially to govern the world. This is not a conspiracy theory. They say this regularly. I mean, and they're practicing it with the decline of borders. Not only, in a sense, again, Israel is the canary in the mine. Israel is illegitimate, right? But so is Australia. You took your land from the indigenous people. Now, it's not Ayers Rock. I don't remember the new name, but that implies that the settlers of Australia have some right to name what exists in the Australian natural environment. The United States, the University of Minnesota Medical School students took an oath in which they noted their standing on stolen land. What's happened to our medical profession is another example of whatever the left touches, it destroys. The American Medical Association has announced that birth certificates should not list the sex of a child, because child should be free to determine their gender identity when they wish. So they have actually come out against it. Medical schools in the United States, many do not say any longer pregnant women. They say birthing persons. So they're shattering everything. And the nation state is one of the things. The more power the individual has, the less power the left has. That's the reason for the desire to give national governments massive power and ultimately international. I play on my radio show, I would say at least twice a year. Jacinda Ardern, your neighbor, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, said, and I play it so often I actually have memorized it, if you do not hear it from the government, it is not true. That is exactly what the Soviet government said. That's why the Soviet communist newspaper was named Truth, Pravda. Pravda means truth. I know Russian. I studied Russian in order to read Pravda, ironically. That is exactly it. All truth emanates from the state. You, John, I, Dennis, we are nothing. The state is everything. And if we differ with the state, it is by definition misinformation, and misinformation should be suppressed.
Well, you and I both attended the conference in London last November, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And its objective is to try and restore the role of the citizen, the recognition of the citizen, the importance of the understanding of the individual worth and dignity of every human being. And my set contribution to that was on the subject of subsidiarity, which is really, of course, an Old Testament concept. That's where it comes from. The American forefathers understood it very well. You should accept responsibility for those things that you should and can best do for yourself. You should encourage your neighbour to do so. And it's a sort of a triangle where, we do what we can in our own lives, our own family lives, our own communities. Do not push up to the next level that which they can not do as well for you or should not have to do, let alone push it all up to the government. It's the exact opposite of where modern secular, the modern secular zeitgeist is being led. And do you think we can manage to encourage? I know in my country, if you talk about rights, many people will still say, what about responsibilities? They're getting it, but they don't know how to carry it forward. They're feeling absolutely swamped by elites. So we're trying to counter that. ARC's trying to counter it. Where do you see the hope? Can we turn this around? Big question. You must believe so, otherwise you wouldn't keep publishing.
That's a very fair point. That's correct. But I also do it because I feel I'm morally obligated on many levels. Just one level is many, many years ago, I went to Normandy Beach where thousands of Brits and Canadians and mostly Americans are buried from the D-Day invasion against the Nazis to liberate Europe. And I feel I owe it to them to fight. Even if I think it's relatively hopeless. I don't think it's hopeless, but even if I did, I would fight because I owe it to them. But on the hope issue, yes, there is hope. Allow me a great anecdote. When in my 20s, I would visit Israel every summer. And I stayed at a mentor's home, a rabbi who's no longer with us, named Pinchas Pelly. And we were very close. So he told me a great story that he was like fifth generation Israeli or Jerusalemite. And he said, in the early days, Israel was largely a socialist country. And so in order to get a phone, you had to go to the Ministry of Communications. You didn't go to a company. It was run by the government. So he went to the government office involved with telephones, and he put in this was in the 1950s, and he put in his order, and he asked the clerk, or Clark, but he asked the clerk, as we put it, so in how long will I get my phone? And the clerk said, in about 6 months. And so my friend said, I said to the clerk, is there any hope that I can get it sooner? And the clerk said, sir, there's always hope. There's no chance.
Oh, dear.
I have committed that to memory, and I've told it hundreds of times since. So whenever anybody asks me, is there any hope? I have this horrible, dark response. There's always hope. There's no chance. But no, I think there's a chance as well. You never know the future. You just know you have to fight. And that's what I'm doing. But, if enough Americans realize the poison that American education is, morally and in terms of, and psychologically, and they decided to homeschool their children in the millions, or if they just, unless there was absolute necessity, like for medicine, or STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, they didn't send their kids to a university. We could begin to turn things around if enough Americans would fight, but people aren't fighters. That's a big problem. And when they start to fight, it's often too late. But I just want to say this, and it's obvious to, I hope it's obvious. I'm sure it's obvious to you, but I hope it's obvious to your listeners that I don't give people false hope. So this is a genuine hope that there is in the United States. This is just a fact. I said earlier, we are the greatest exporter of toxic ideas like wokeism, but we're also by far have the most robust anti-left institutions and organizations and movements in the world today. So there is a real counter battle taking place. I mean, just on a personal note, my organization, PragerU, or Prager University, has well over 1 billion views a year, and according to Google, 65% of them are under 35 years of age. And the left hates us. I mean, just hates us. But there are states that are now announcing that they are encouraging teachers to use PragerU videos in their classrooms. And the left just goes ballistic because they know they can't handle dissent. The reason they don't want conservatives on college campuses is they know deep down that in 90 minutes, we can undo 4 years of what they have done. So they don't even want to allow us our 5-minute videos in a classroom or 90 minutes in a speech.
Well, you've been very kind with your time. Just to round it out, it does seem to me that one aspect of the overreach that modern progressives and elites have engaged in is that they have actually, I think, forced a lot of young men particularly to rethink. If you are endlessly accused of being toxic simply because you're male, if you're endlessly accused of being untrustworthy and an oppressor simply because you're male, you're going to break out somewhere. And you can follow a very bad model, I suppose. I can think of one globally. And say, oh, well, if I'm toxic, I'll be truly toxic. If I'm misogynistic, I'll be truly misogynistic. So the wrong response. But then many of them, I suspect, are confused and uncertain, but looking for a better way. And I must pay credit. I do believe that Jordan Peterson has played uncle to an awful lot of young men around the world, certainly in my country. And he's saying, you're not toxic just because you're masculine. You're not the person you ought to be either. Go and sort yourself out. None of us are perfect. But then go out and be as noble as you can and accept responsibility. So I just think that there is a sense in which going through that valley of darkness is for some of our younger people, making them seek out something better, because they do know. You talk about on campuses, you can undo in 90 minutes what they've learnt in 4 years. My experience is that many of them know they've been fed a load of nonsense. They're just looking for somebody to explain it to them properly, which is maybe why you've got such a massive listening audience.
I think that's true, but the dilemma today is considerably more with the young woman than the young man. If you look at the hysterical demonstrators post George Floyd at the Supreme Court when they render verdicts that they don't like, and now on campuses, it's quite disproportionately young females. The least happy group in the United States, as I noted earlier. That is a real problem. It is toxic, but it's toxic leftism. But that's redundant. But there are a lot of young males who are troubled. You know, we have this image of many young American males, still living in their parents' homes, playing video games in the basement, doing nothing constructive for society, not dating women. That is real, but young females is a very, very serious dilemma.
Well, again, thank you for your time, and let's remember Churchill's apparently shortest ever school leaving address, when he told his audience of young people 3 times over, never give up, never give up,
That's
never
correct.
give up. 9 words.
Well, my line is, is 4 words. Despair is a sin.
Thank you very much indeed. You've been extraordinarily thought-provoking, informative, and fun.
Australia and the West are lucky to have you.
Oh, that's kind of you. All the very best. Look forward to seeing you the next time we personally encounter.
Thank you.